700,000 people on 0 hours contracts. Could you live on one?
No, look, as I said,
Could
some
you live
people...
on one?
Well, you have...
David Cameron, do you know how many food banks there were in this country when you came to power?
I don't have the exact figures, but I know that usage of food banks has gone up, and there are many amazing volunteers who man those food banks and provide an important service.
There were 66 when you came to power. There are now 421. 900,000 people took food parcels last year, free food parcels. You talked about broken Britain and fixing it. You haven't. It's more broken now than it was.
Well, I don't accept that, because if you look at what's happened with our economy, there are 1.89 million more people in work than when I became Prime Minister. We've got 900,000 fewer people on out-of-work
benefits. Is an
benefits.
increase in food banks a mark of success?
Look, obviously there has been an increase in food bank use. That's partly because of the difficulties we faced as a country. It's also, Jeremy, because we changed the rules. The previous government didn't allow job centres to advertise the existence of food banks. They thought it would be bad PR. I thought that was a wrong decision. I thought it was a poor decision. So we allowed them to point people towards food banks if they needed them. But look, the big picture is we want to get more people back to work. We've turned the economy around, and it's jobs that are the best route out of poverty.
Is it acceptable in a rich country like ours that there are that number of people depending on free food aid?
Obviously, I want fewer people to be using food banks, and I want more people to have the security of a job. But we have created 1,000 jobs for every day this government's been in office. Now, that's a statistic, but behind that statistic are people who are able to provide for their families, who are earning a wage, who are able to build a better life.
How many of those jobs are 0 hours contracts?
About 1 in 50 jobs are 0 hours contracts. Yeah. So this is an
Could you live on a 0 hours contract?
No, some people choose a 0 hours contract, for instance, students, because they want the flexibility. But what we did is, hold on a second, we outlawed, first government to do this, the idea of exclusive 0 hours contracts where you can only work for one business. So we passed a law saying that shouldn't happen. But it is a myth. Some people want to say the jobs that have been created are all low-paid jobs. That's not true.
No one's saying
Well,
I'm not saying
but the hint you're trying to give is that...
I'm saying there are 700,000 people on 0 hours contracts. Could you live on one?
No, look, as I said,
Could
some
you live
people...
on one?
Well, I want to create a country where more people have the opportunity of the full-time work that they want.
Could you live on a 0 hours contract?
Well, look, that's not the question. The question is...
Well, it's the question I'm asking.
Well, yeah, but the point is some people choose a 0 hours contract. If you're a student, for instance, and you want to do some part-time work, a 0 hours contract can work for you. That's why we haven't outlawed them altogether. What we've outlawed is exclusive 0 hours contracts. And no...
Against all expectations, the coalition government, despite out-of-control immigration, has managed to reverse the early 2-year trend for rising unemployment. UK unemployment has now fallen to its lowest level for 6 years, down nearly 500,000 on a year ago, with expectations for another 100,000 jobs to be created in the quarter up to election day, thus boosting the Tories' election prospects. However, the headline rate masks the truth of real unemployment that currently stands at over 9 million, as coalition government has failed to reverse the Labour catastrophe of creating near 10 million vested interests of economically inactive working age population, which also warns of what would happen under Labour, a resumption of the trend for increasing the number of vested interests on benefits that are not included in the official unemployment statistics.
Let's come to the question of the economy then. Apart from broken Britain, one of your slogans last time was that the country was overwhelmed in debt. Overwhelmed was the word you used. How much money have you borrowed?
Well, we have cut the budget deficit in half as a share of GDP.
How much money have you borrowed?
Well, look, the key thing is the amount of money you borrow every year, the deficit.
Do you know what it is?
That is down in half. I know that we have borrowed a lot of money because the deficit adds to your debt every year.
Do you know what the figure is?
Well, you're going to tell me, Jeremy.
I am. It's a mere £500 billion.
But that is a lot less than the previous government was borrowing.
No, it isn't. It's more than the previous government borrowed.
Look, the annual overdraft, the deficit, has come down by 1/2 as a share of GDP, and debt, the total stock, the debt as a share of our national income is now falling. Now, we haven't finished the job. We have been working to a plan, and the British people have been working incredibly hard to that plan of turning the economy around, getting the deficit down, having public services that we can afford, and creating jobs and livelihoods for all our people. That is what we have been doing. Now, if you're saying we haven't gone fast enough to cut the deficit, I would agree we need to complete the job. But all my political opponents have been saying we should borrow more, we should spend more, we should tax more. That's the alternative that you face with Ed Milliband and his
approach. My point is merely the chasm between what was said and what was actually done.
Firstly, the deficit does not equate to being the nation's overdraft, as the deficit is in fact new debt that is added to Britain's growing debt mountain at the rate of 100 billion per year. The last Labour government accrued debt in its last 5-year term of 532 billion, whilst the current coalition government will have accrued debt of at least 536 billion over its full 5-year term. Therefore, David Cameron is wrong to state that the coalition has borrowed less than the last Labour government, in nominal terms at least. David Cameron also stated that the stock of debt as a proportion of the economy has fallen. However, as this graph illustrates, debt to GDP in May 2010 was 55% and has since risen every year to a peak of 75% of GDP for this financial year. The bottom green line explains why the increase in debt has not so far had any negative economic consequences, because the Bank of England has been busy monetising UK government debt to the extent that it now holds approximately 1/3 of government debt, which means that the effective debt burden is around 38% rather than 75% of GDP, as most of the interest earned on this debt is repaid back to the government, i.e. creative accounting. However, there is a price to pay for printing money in the form of QE and government bonds, and that is to cause inflation, as the exponential inflation trend illustrates, which makes me laugh when I see academics and journalists panicking over the threat of deflation, when the consistent overriding trend is one of exponential inflation, just as I warned of in my January 2010 Inflation Megatrend ebook that you can download for free at the Market Oracle website.
And let's take another one. Let's take immigration. You promised at the last election that you would reduce immigration to the level it was at in the early 1990s, tens of thousands a year. Do you know how many people you actually let in?
No, immigration has not been cut to the tens of thousands.
No, it hasn't. You failed.
But what we did is we cut immigration from outside the European Union. That is down by 13%. We closed down about 800 bogus education colleges, which were really visa factories. But inside the European Union, immigration has increased. I'm afraid not least because we've actually created more jobs in Britain than the rest of the European Union put together. The European Union's economy has been so stagnant that people have come here to work. So what we need to do now is keep the economy working, but fix the broken welfare system. And I'm going to just make this point, if you'll let me. There are some key changes I'm going to make, which is that if you come from Europe to Britain, you cannot claim unemployment benefit. If you don't have a job in 6 months, you'll have to return to the country you came from. You'll have to work here for 4 years paying into the system before you get tax credits or benefits out of the system. And while you're here, you can't send child benefit home to the family if they're living in another country. Now, those changes, taken together, key welfare changes, will reduce immigration.
It's not what you said last time. It's not what you said last time. You said, quote, no ifs, no buts, we make a promise to the British people that we will reduce immigration to the level it was at in the early 1990s. You've not done it.
I believe that is still the right ambition, and we achieved a cut from outside the EU.
But inside the EU, no buts, promise, not ambition.
Inside the EU, we haven't achieved it, but we need to make these welfare changes in order to do it.
But you accept you haven't met the promise there.
We've not met the commitment that I made.
The latest ONS immigration statistics once more illustrate the failure of the condemned government to control immigration, where the past 5 years have just been a continuation of the Labour catastrophe, a 15-year-long megatrend of importing over 3 million people, most of whom are as vested interests expected to vote Labour. Net immigration has accelerated to 298,000 per year, now soaring to the same level of out-of-control immigration as under the last Labour government, which is set against David Cameron's 2010 broken promise to cut net immigration to the tens of thousands by the end of this Parliament.
Mr. Speaker, before the last election, the Prime Minister made a no ifs, no buts promise on immigration. Can you remind the House exactly what that promise was?
Well, we promised to cut net migration. We've cut it from outside the European Union, but it's increased from inside the European Union, not least because we've created more jobs than the rest of the European Union put together.
He was rather coy about his precise promise, Mr. Speaker. It was in his contract with the British people. Net migration cut to the tens of thousands. But now it's at 298,000, higher than when he took office. And here's what he said in the contract. Here's what he said. If we don't deliver our side of the bargain, vote us out in 5 years' time. When he said that, did he mean it?
There are two reasons for high migration.
The most recent surge is as a consequence of opening the borders to Romania and Bulgaria, resulting in huge social consequences for settled communities and public services such as housing, health, and in school places. Whilst BBC propaganda tends to paint a picture of hard-working migrants contributing more than they take out, however, analysis by Open Europe demonstrates this to be false. Once factoring in in-work benefits, i.e. for single workers of £93.77 per week against zero for those working in Poland and Bulgaria. Whilst families with 2 children result in average in-work benefits payments of £330 per week, which is set against salary deductions of just £31 that results in a huge benefits net subsidy to the migrant workers of £300 per week. Therefore, the truth is that migrants across Eastern Europe and Southern Europe come to the UK for benefits. It's just that these are in-work benefits for which there is an economic cost in terms of the budget deficit and unemployed youth.
But again, you said one thing and you did another.
Well, we said that the most important task for the government was to get the economy
Said
growing,
you've no
was to
plans to
get
raise
jobs
VAT,
growing, and was to get the deficit down. And I would say on any analysis, and we had an appalling inheritance. We inherited a situation where Britain's budget deficit was forecast to be bigger than Greece's. Now, we had to take difficult decisions. I will defend all of those decisions. Difficult ones, the ones that were hard to take, but the right thing for the country. And the result, there's a connection between the difficult decisions we had to take and the fact that we now have the fastest growing economy of any major Western economy. We've created 2 million private sector jobs. We've got 750,000 more businesses. The British economy is working. Now we need to make sure that people can... what I want is an economy that doesn't just look good on the page. I want people to feel that they can get a job, they can have a livelihood, they can buy a home, they can get a good school place for their children, they can enjoy a retirement. Those are the things. But that's what this plan, Jeremy, is all about.
In the spirit of transparency, can you tell us where this £12 billion in welfare cuts is going to come from?
Well, let me explain.
George Osborne's March 2015 budget forecast that as if by magic the current £90 billion budget deficit would resolve into a £5.2 billion surplus for 2019 and a £7 billion surplus for 2020. However, here is a reminder of Osborne's 2010 forecast for the deficit to have virtually disappeared by now and Con-Lib government to borrow some £414 billion by now. Compared to his forecast, the coalition government will have borrowed an estimated £550 billion. Therefore, George Osborne's forecast for borrowing £210 billion over the next 5 years are pure fantasy and likely to be at least twice that amount, and far worse if interest rates start to rise. The bottom line is that virtually all of the economic growth of the past 5 years has been as the consequence of debt that the Bank of England has monetized, which is why there is a cost of living crisis, because printing money is the primary cause of inflation.
Now, you've said you're not going to stand for a third term. That means that a vote for Cameron is a vote, if you're successful, for Cameron as leader of his party and Prime Minister, perhaps, for 2, 3, 4 years, after which it's Boris Johnson or George Osborne or Theresa May or Sajid Javid or Uncle Tom Cobley.
If you vote Conservative, I've said I will serve every day of a full second term. What I was doing in that interview was just giving a honest answer to an honest question, because I think people need to know that sort of thing. Are you one of those leaders who, like sort of Chairman Mao, thinks you can go on and on and on and on? Or actually, do you think, look, I'm really passionate about what I'm doing. I think we're turning this country around. I'm passionate about having another term, completing this vital work. But after that, 10 years, 2 terms, I think politicians do have a date by which they need to say, well, I think it's time for someone else to take over. I'm not some person who thinks that you just, you're indispensable. We're not indispensable. It's important to remember that.
David Cameron, thank you.
Meanwhile, David Cameron has made a huge blunder today by apparently announcing his own resignation during his second term, even before he has been re-elected, which has triggered much speculation about his successor, as it looks like he may only be Prime Minister for 2 or 3 years before the likes of Boris Johnson takes over. much as Gordon Brown took over from Tony Blair just 2 years into his third term.
Her Majesty the Queen has asked me to form a new government.
On the cusp of his official campaign to stay, he's told us when he wants to go.
Nancy's hunger strike this morning lasted
In a casual weekend, at-home interview with the Camerons, he made this admission to the BBC.
There definitely comes a time where fresh, a fresh pair of eyes and fresh leadership would be good, and the Conservative Party has got some great people coming up, the Theresa Mays and the George Osbornes and the Boris Johnsons and there's plenty of talent there. There's I'm surrounded by very good people.
The full 5 years, but no third term.
The third term is not something I'm contemplating. Terms are like shredded wheat. 2 are wonderful, 3 might just be too many.
But this campaign wasn't meant to be about if and when. He was off.
All the Tory party strategists, including Linton and Crosby, will be tearing their hair out tonight because the last thing they want is this kind of surprise. They want people to stick to the script.
But starting the conversation about your departure can backfire. Tony Blair said he wanted to do a full third term, but it gave licence to his opponents to agitate for him to go much faster.
Today I announce my decision to stand down from the leadership of the Labour Party.
They won. And there's no hiding his ambition now. The PM named his longtime friend and ally George Osborne a possible successor, alongside the Home Secretary Theresa May.
Hi, how are you? How are you doing?
And, of course, Boris Johnson.
The next leader of the Tory party is probably a babe unborn.
That's not what he thinks. You, Theresa May, George Osborne, very much for.
Kids grow up fast these days, folks.
So alongside the long-term economic plan election campaign, there is now also the long-term Tory leadership campaign. But many in Westminster still won't buy that David Cameron will stay on that long.
I don't think he will last beyond 2017 anyway. The European referendum that he's committed to hold will be so divisive in the Conservative Party. I think you'll need a leader to replace him to heal the divided Conservative Party. So he's probably going to be quite a short-term Prime Minister if he's re-elected anyway, but why invite the speculation?
David Cameron hasn't even fought and won the right to stay on here as Prime Minister yet, but he's even already name-checking his potential successors for next time round. There's a risk that even voters who look on him kindly might feel that's rather presumptuous. And just when his party needs to be focusing on allowing him back here in a matter of weeks, he himself has put the next Tory leadership contest smack bang on the agenda.
What Number 10 can't answer tonight is when and how David Cameron would hand over. Might he fight a third election then go? Hand over before? When is a full term not a full term? Intentional or not, the Prime Minister's raised hard questions. He didn't need to spend the next 6 weeks being asked.
Current opinion poll seat forecasters, as illustrated by New Statements May 2015.com, now put Labour marginally ahead of the Conservatives, which compares against my long-standing forecast as follows. The remaining balance of 558 seats, split according to the consensus view such as May 2015.com, would result in Labour leading on 281 seats against Conservatives on about 277. However, this analysis suggests that the opinion polls are grossly underestimating the number of seats the Conservatives will actually win on May 7th, where there is even a chance for the Conservatives to win an outright majority, though probability favours another hung parliament. However, given the UKIP surge, it will be tough for the Conservatives to retain their current tally of 302 MPs, as I expect at least 3 will be lost to UKIP and many more lost to Labour, against which at least a handful will likely be gained from the Lib Dems, which therefore suggests that the Tories will achieve a seat total in the 290s. My forecast conclusion is for the Conservatives to win 296 seats at the May 7th general election and Labour second on 262 seats, and the full seats per political party breakdown as shown. Therefore, the most probable outcome is for a continuation of the Con-Dem coalition government on 326 seats, i.e. Conservative 296 plus Lib Dem 30, where any shortfall would likely find support from the DUP's 8 seats. The alternative is for a truly messy Labour, Liberal, SNP supported chaotic government on about 327 seats, which in my opinion would be a truly disastrous outcome for Britain, nearly as bad as if Scotland had voted for independence last September. Another possibility is that should the Conservatives do better than forecast, i.e. secure over 300 seats, but still fail to win an overall majority, then they may choose to go it alone with the plan to work towards winning a May 2016 general election. The bottom line is that the opinion polls do not reflect how people will actually vote on May 7th, when they are faced with the stark choice of a steady as she goes condemn government or take a huge gamble on Ed Milliband's Labour Party. So in my opinion, several millions of voters will choose to play it safe with the condemned government, which thus is the most probable outcome.